Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Simon Walker here. I'm Director of Training at Maxon and Red Giant, so thank you for joining us. We're just getting set up here before we officially start. We've got our fantastic expert, Nick Harauz, on the line as well. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Simon, how's it going, man?
It's going well, thank you. Excellent. And we've got a whole bunch of people joining us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, and we have our first problem. I was about to say, I've added some links to some download PDFs for some of the other webinar content we're running, and they're powered by Amazon Web Service. And Angel has said that the link to the PDF isn't working. So great, it's always off to a good start. Tell you what, I will put in the download links to these right in the chat. Here we are. So let's put those in the chat window. I mean, that's a good introduction. What we are doing is that we're sharing lots of these techniques in multiple different ways. You could, for example, go to Cineversity for Maxon and Cinema 4D content, and also for the Red Giant, there's hundreds of hours on the tutorials button. Here it is, tutorials button on the Red Giant website. And we'll show a few more of these tips as we're going along. But what I wanted to mention is, here we are. Let me grab a couple of these links, and I wanted to just show you what's going on in these webinars. So here we are. We've got, of course, this series of demystified webinars, but I just wanted to bring your attention to some of the ones that we're running this week. We've got visual effects artist and expert and member of the Visual Effects Society, Chad Perkins, is running a series of webinars this week, so that they're open and available. Please feel free to come along and register. And that's what one of the links is. That's one of the links I'll put in the chat window. Here we go, this week's Cinema 4D and Trapcode webinars. And what Chad is doing this week, he's taking Cinema and Trapcode with the shipping versions and actually showing you workflows in between them. And we're running these on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week, 2 sessions, one at 9 a.m. Pacific, one at midday Pacific. But feel free wherever you are to come and join us. And that's one of the download links that I put in the software. And the other one is the PDF, which looks at the range of techniques that we're running throughout this series. So this month in May, Nick's joining us to go through and look at these various topics. And today we're looking at fire sparks, dust and smoke, all the typical things that people ask questions when we go around. When do we do the training sessions with customers and online? These are very popular questions. So we thought we'd distill them into a series of topics and chat through not only how to do certain things, but also the reason why you would do them and how they reflect and mimic real life effects and so on. But anyway, so this is the series of both of those. Please feel free to download those. I'll just move those off the screen. PDF is working for some people. Thanks, Mads. And also a regular attendee, Kent, hi there. Thank you. What I usually do at this point is say, hey, can anyone hear what's going on? So, and can you see my screen and can you hear me? It sounds like you can, so this is good. Excellent. All good. Thanks, Nico. This is brilliant. Great. So, yes, a couple of other quick little things. One thing I wanted to share is that we're very excited by the combination or the joining together that Red Giant has done with Maxon. And we're very excited because the two engineering teams are talking to each other. And so we've got, I think publicly, our CEO announced a couple of weeks ago when we did Cinema 4D Live that we're actually working on a number of things of integrating, and we'll see some more integration with Cineware inside Trapcode for sure in the coming weeks. So we're very excited about that. And in fact, we touch on that next week when we go through our using OBJs inside Trapcode when we talk about that. But one other thing that is new that I wanted to share with you is that if you are a student, you can have access to free licenses for study and messing around with the software. So here we go. I'm going to add this into the chat link. Here we go. And this for both Cinema 4D and for Red Giant. Here we go. And just a little note under that, put a note for that section and also for the Red Giant aspect. So if you are interested in doing that, please contact those, go to those links or send an email to Red Giant under academic@redgiant.com and feel free to take advantage of that. And all these links I'm putting together are going to be inside the main. Here we go. Inside the main email that follows up. Great. Okay, so right, let's get kicked off. I think that's that's all the housekeeping. Oh yes, the other thing, we're recording these sessions. So on the links, if you, let's say for example, you want to join for next week and you'd missed a previous week, then the registration links also act as the recording links. So feel free to have a look at those, and what it will do, it will then give you a link to the recording for all the sessions that we do, both this week with Chad and also all the demystifying sessions. Great, so I'm going to switch settings so I can go over and share. You can have access to the screen, Nick.
Okay, no, sounds great. Could start it off that way and switch it back and forth as need be.
Absolutely. So let's make you the presenter. Here we go. And I'll turn off my webcam just for the time being.
Okay. And just bear with me a second. Does everyone see my screen okay?
I can see it, yep.
Okay, hold on one more second. For some reason, my mouse, which is electronic, has just decided to pass out for a second, which is always fun, right, when you begin a presentation. But Simon, I wanted to thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to kind of talk about working inside of Trapcode particular, but just as well as After Effects and compositing things such as fire, smoke, and dust, and trying to start off with maybe a little bit of principles that we should keep in mind when we're working inside this application, and you know, using other tools within Red Giant Complete of how we could use that to our advantage when working with these elements. So if that sounds good, you guys are in for a treat for sure. Okay.
Excellent. Hey Nick, just before we kick off, I've known you for a while now, but
Yep.
I was just wondering if you could tell everyone a little bit about your background and how you got into this, because you are one of the few people I know who are a master trainer at multiple different applications. There's at least, it was all the Apple Pro Tools and all the Adobe ones. I believe, aren't you qualified in Avid as well?
I am qualified in Avid, although that definitely needs a little bit of an update. But I started in the industry as a video editor, Simon. This was, wow, back about over 20 years ago. And the first editing system that I used at the time was Final Cut Pro 3 for my first project. Most of the stuff that I was putting together was for a film company in Vancouver, putting together trailer content and a lot of marketing material. That then started a route into more commercial-based post-production work, where I started working with a blend of both video editing as well as integrating motion graphics and VFX into my workflow. A lot of the companies that I worked for, budgets were sometimes very, very short, so to speak. So I needed to figure out ways that I could work efficiently by myself before necessarily farming it out to other people in collaborative workflows. And now brings us to today, where I do a lot of training. One of my primary resources as an outlet is LinkedIn Learning. I have a bunch of courses with the modern day Final Cut Pro 10, as well as inside of Premiere and After Effects workflows. And recently started working with you guys over for, I guess, well, not that recently, but almost approximately a year to the date now, doing training throughout your wonderful product line inside of Red Giant. So that's a little bit about me, and so
stuff.
forth. Yeah. So
Great. Well, let's. We've got best part of an hour to go through our various things.
Yeah.
So talk us through some of these notes that you got on screen.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about kind of like some principles and things and ways to think about fire, smoke, and dust in Red Giant Complete. Just some of the principles about them, and in particular, why it's tricky in some cases to get realistic composites with certain elements within particular, and where you may want to go to footage or other elements for working with it in VFX and both inside of motion graphics. So I wanted to start by looking at some of the principles of fire. One of the big things, and you commonly actually refer to memory colors in your training, Simon. This is like a little bit of a concept from Magic Bullet Looks, where things such as sky and green grass get embedded in our memory, and the same thing is true of memory. With fire, we're so potentially used to seeing it at campfires or in many other ways. So the organic nature of it is within our memory. So trying to convey that to someone else, we want to pay extra careful attention when we're dealing with fire to actually sell the shot. A lot of times you might look at fire and think it's opaque, but it's far from that. It actually, happens to be light. And there's a huge varying difference between the light and dark parts of a fire element. And with that, also an incredible amount of detail when we see it. Some of that to be very bright glows, other detail in particular in the translucent areas and how fire or that element by itself is sort of overlaid on top of itself. The edges of fire, which makes it somewhat hard to composite, even with a shot, has edges that have varying translucency. So this is something that we really want to keep in mind when dealing with fire. And I think in some cases, if you ever get fire footage or an element, that's where VFX Suite has you covered with Super Comp and some cool things. I think both me and Simon will show you of how you can work with footage elements. Another thing that we want to keep in mind is how fire might interact with both foreground and background objects. So usually what you're going to do is see heat ripples potentially from the objects that are going to be behind your fire source. And that's going to create some forms of displacement to those items and even ripples across those elements. And I just wanted to break down, because Red Giant is going to give you offerings for both dealing with fire as footage inside of Particular, as well as VFX Suite, as well as options inside of Particular for actually grabbing sprites that ship with the project. I thought we would look at some of the benefits and minuses of each, and things to keep in mind when we're looking for fire sources as a footage. So there's a lot of sites out there, Simon, as you may note, that have fire that you can download. And one in the Apple universe I will mention is Motion VFX. It's a site that actually has some elements that I'll show where you have pre-composited images, pre-keyed images for fire, dust, and smoke. And something to keep in mind with this and other sites out there as well, I know people at Red Giant commonly refer to Action VFX as another source for these elements. Simon, what are some of the sites that you use for fire elements as well?
Yeah, those two are the main ones.
Okay.
For doing things. It's an interesting topic. The idea about creating fake fire, if you like, versus real fire. We could talk about that a bit later on when we start to compare them.
Yeah, and
it's go for it, Nick.
Oh, sorry, God. Okay, so sorry, I thought you were about to say something else. The footage that you usually receive from what I've seen online, a lot of times people these days will shoot fire elements in slow motion. Motion VFX in particular, for their fire and dust elements, I think it was their cameras were overcranked to 1200 frames per second capture, just to give you an idea. And using After Effects tools, you can take these really slow sources of fire or dust and then speed them up to the actual frame rate that you wish them to play back in your motion graphics application or nonlinear editor. Sometimes it's recommended to try to avoid pre-keyed fire, and that's for the exact reason that fire is not an opaque element. There's varying levels of translucency, and we want to keep that in mind when we work with fire. You just don't want to apply an extract key to the black background. It won't give you the result that you're looking for. Usually, most of these composited elements, including the ones that ship inside of Particular, you want your fire on black to preserve this kind of semi-translucent translucent areas of the fire inside the application. And another thing to keep in mind is that you're going to want to mix it with other elements. Fire is going to create smoke, and as we talked about, displacement and heat blur when we talk about dealing with it with footage. Not to mention the integration of the footage that you receive into whatever shot you wish to apply it to, which we'll usually deal with in sort of color correction. Now, in terms of Particular and inside of Red Giant, there's a few different ways that we can look at fire. I wanted to talk about Trapcode Particular, and one thing which was an option which I think is awesome, which is inside Particular, you can switch between GPU and CPU acceleration. And when you start to deal with graphic content inside the designer, it's good practice to use GPU acceleration. Wouldn't you agree, Simon?
Well, in fact, it's almost like you're setting this up for me to show something later. Yeah. Yes, I've got a good practical example where we'll shortly be jumping into showing some actual things, but we wanted to just cover some of the key things about the reasons why things could look fake, or the things to look at when you're working with these external sources. We had a nice question from Aeneas. Nick, would you be able to share this PowerPoint presentation? I know it's a keynote one, but it looks like there's some interesting intro or concepts in there. So if you're comfortable with sharing that, we can add that to the notes.
100%. I'm going to share this as a keynote, and Simon, just after the presentation too, I'll export it out as a PDF so that people have multiple versions that they can access this from. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that.
Talking or going back to Particular, there's actually fire presets, sprites in the, there's fire presets inside the designer that you can access. The way that they look in the designer might be a little deceiving. So it's a place for you to start off and taking advantage of that GPU acceleration. But when you bring it back into After Effects, mixing it with color correction and then distortion effects is really how you're going to bring your fire to life. With fire, and one of the other new features of the last version of Particular is your ability to work with multiple particle systems. So one thing you could do is you could have one particle system, referencing a type of flame or image loop, and you could have another particle system then referencing smoke right behind it, or another type of flame or loop, to create more believability when you're designing it with a particle system. We also want to think about using sprites, as I was just mentioning as well. I'll get into this, but these are referenced image files or small MOV files. There are tons that ship with Particular to at least show you some of the possibilities. And keep in mind that anything can be referenced as a sprite inside your After Effects composition. The sprites that you'll see are also included when you have them referenced by a particle system. What we want to do is keep in mind that they actually have black backgrounds, so they don't have that transparent background, and you're going to want to use this unmult feature to get rid of it inside before referencing it by Particular. A few other things that I wanted to mention about fire, and now looking beyond the Trapcode suite, is inside Universe you actually have a heat effect, which is pretty awesome for giving ripples or adding that to text items. And one of the newest newest effects out there, VFX Super Comp, you can basically give it an additive layer, Super Comp, but we're going to show this as well, which happens to be like a fire source or smoke source. And I think one of the best things is the presets designed for fire. So in that tool, it basically takes your fire source, then adds a bunch of things to help composite into the background, as well as cause distortion. And I'm sure you might have also some examples for that too, right, Simon?
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
In fact, that's a good segue. We could jump into showing some of these concepts that we've been chatting about. What do you want to start with, Nick?
Yes. Okay, so let me actually hop out of my Keynote, and I'm going to hop into After Effects. And just give me a second. I'm actually right now, just by the way, looking at.
I can see your After Effects screen.
That's great. Just bear with me for one more second. Okay, great. My mouse is giving me a run for my money. Okay, so what I would do is actually I wanted to show a few things in a new composition. We could start there, and I'm going to then maybe hand over the screen to you because I know you have some fire examples too, right, Simon?
Yep.
So I've added a new solid object, and I'm going to make sure in this particular case under solid settings that this happens to be completely black. Okay, and what I'll do is really quickly go to the effect menu, and under RG trap code, let's take a look at particular. And here's your, regular particular look by defaults. We want to hop straight into the designer, and I want to show you a few places where you can find some of these items. So I'm going to head into the presets. I'm going to go first of all up here to the left where it says single system presets. And one category specifically is set for smoke and fire. Again, I want you to keep in mind as I select some of these presets, this is a rough simulation of fire, a directional fire in this particular case, that you can do some color treatments as well as some treatment with physics inside of particular, but it's really using the whole compositing tool set inside of After Effects, as well as adding distortion effects, which is really going to sell this fire and how it is composited with other elements on your screen. But the fun thing about these are single system presets that are available for you. And it's really, in some cases, depending on the type of fire that you're looking to create, the combination of these that might sell your effect. So I want to draw your attention, this is just one particle system. It's being emitted in X right now. You can see the direction there with the motion block. And if I showed you the particle type, which we can see over here at the side, is it's actually referencing a sprite, like I mentioned, Simon. And if we look here to choose a sprite, which is any image, so to speak, right at the very top are these these presets that ship with particular. Some of them in particular are fire explosions. So when you think of an explosion, you might actually want to use it with the explosion emitter type. Then you have other elements here, which are fire loops meant to be repeated over and over again. Some of these sources could be easily mixed together to provide more believability for certain composites, not to mention mixing them with other elements like smoke as well. I should mention that there are other elements as you go further down the list that you can use, image sprites down here that might be able to use for other organic elements such as various water scenes, but we're also talking about dust, so I wanted to make mention about some of those sprites down here that you can reference as well.
In fact, that might be a good time for us to do a quick switch over because I've got a couple of comments about GPU versus CPU processing that might be useful.
I've just sent the screen right back to you, Simon.
Okay, lovely. So I've got an easy instance of just a still photo In this case, it's Steam, but this works with the same plan, if you like. And I'll just wanted to point out the GPU versus CPU setting inside Particular, because what Nick is talking about, he's talking about using custom sprites inside Particular. And as you probably will well know, you can have all sorts of different particle types, but if you deal with a custom sprite, they tend to process faster on the GPU because of just the nature of how GPUs work, because of the multiple processing that they're capable of doing. But you can as well use all those sprites to create certain types of fire, but I found it faster if you can get away with using the native particles inside Particular itself. So in fact, what I'll do on this example, I just reset a couple of different things here. Particle type, let's just go back to sphere. Just wanted to show you a little trick. Size, reset that back to normal and set the opacity back to normal. Here we go. And turn off the physics here. Let's just reset this. So this is a simple box emitter using the sphere particle. And we found that if you use the cloudlet particle, then it's a nice way of being able to simulate steam, in this case, without having to use a sprite. And if I just ramp up the size of these, so they're just like 50 or 60 or so, and then with the opacity, the trick here is just to reduce the opacity down to something really low. Let's set it to 1 or 2. In fact, I'm going to set this to just 1. And now I could ramp up these number of seconds, particles per second, 220 or so. But the idea here is that we're kind of faking this steam approach without having to use the sprites. The custom sprites. And also, if I just jump into gravity, or not gravity, the physics section, as well as the manifestation of how they look, it's also the movement. So you can, of course, move these up in the wind, let's say wind Y, and add some turbulence to them. And under the turbulence field settings, affect the position, and so on. But there's a fantastic way where you can just set the fluid systems inside Particular to simulate this as well. This is just fluid on its standard default settings. Let's give this a few more particles per second here. So you might not get 30 frames a second through the webinar software, but the recording does show this pretty accurately. It's got a higher frame rate, if you like. But the idea is what we're trying to do is get these eddies and these swirls inside this this setup. But the point I wanted to make is that if you were doing this under CPU, let's just show you here that you can do 2 types of processing, CPU versus GPU. And you can change this either in the panel or inside the designer itself. Let's just click on the preference cog. Here we go, set up for GPU processing. If I set this to CPU, on my Mac here, you can see automatically that, or immediately, that it's taking much longer to process, because although this is using a standard particle, every time you change the size from the default, which is around about 4, in fact, let's just double click on this. You can reset it. Here we go, 5 units is the default size. As soon as you change the default size, then that's a process that is more efficient on the GPU. And if we just go back into the preference cog, switch over GPU, the difference between streaming and direct is that sometimes if you've got different blend modes on different particles, then the GPU automatically can switch between those two. Direct is doing all the frames in series, whereas streaming does it processing in parallel. But if I click OK on here, then you get much faster throughput. So it's just something to mention. I mean, I'm on my, let's just cancel out here and just go on the Mac. What have I got on here? I've got a Radeon Pro Vega 20. So this is the standard one that comes inside MacBook Pro, but I've also got my Dell Precision 7540 with NVIDIA RTX 4000 card in it, which is twice as fast. And this, I tried the test render of this, and the the Dell machine, just like crank through it. So I think it's a difference in terms of the processor, but it doesn't matter what system you're on because you can switch between GPU and CPU on those settings. And you can even switch the project in between Mac and Windows and it will automatically update because they're all binary. But it's just that difference between when you're playing around with different particles, it's worth, especially if you're using a standard particle at a higher size, or if you're using a sprite, that's a good reason to jump on and use GPU processing.
There were two really cool things.
Back. Oh, sorry, go Nick. I'll jump back to you whilst we talk about that.
No problem. And I thought there were two really cool things that you showed there amongst all the other cool things. But one is when I look online, I don't see a lot of, there are some, but there's not a lot of tutorials using Steam just yet with the fluid simulation under physics, as in fluid is still somewhat new. So that was really kind of cool to see how the negative buoyancy, the buoyancy value itself took shape to actually put some more believability to the Steam. And then something you showed really quickly, it was so small, but a lot that often goes overlooked is how you reset a value inside of the designer, which is by double clicking it on its name. So that was just a really kind of cool thing you were doing to work more efficiently, and that you taught me, but I wanted to make mention of that too when you were resetting one of the values by double clicking it on a name. That's a really quick way to start again. So
cool.
Jumping,
Thank you.
I'll jump into this fire and kind of just show the potential of sort of working with multiple systems in a specific light like this. So you have your fire source. You can see that the particle type is set to a sprite. Looking at a few other things with this particle system, specifically with this fire simulation, the size quickly ramps up to its full size. You can see here with the size over life graph. I'm so bad at drawing in this graph a lot of the times. If I want to make a change with my mouse, I often will end up smoothing it out, the graph, or going to this tool right here. I find this often gets overlooked, which gives you points. And I find it so easy to make flexible changes here inside of particular by clicking back and forth between the two different tools here for drawing curves. The other thing that we can see here in this particle system with the sprite reference is the opacities over life value. So while it quickly rises in size at the beginning from 0 to its current size, at the end, the opacity over life is what is causing this system to fade out. All that's really taking shape on this for this preset, which is to get you up and running, is the motion being set to directional and rotation, it being projected out in Y space, in X space, as I was mentioning. So back on to working with multiple systems, which is also fairly new to this version of particular, where what we can do is, here's our master system. That was the single system preset I added. What I'm going to do is just press the plus icon, and you'll see there that another instance of particular was added. And this could really be helpful for dust, smoke, and fires, working with these multiple systems in certain occasions. Even with this multiple system, you should know that if I go back to single system presets, I believe I might be wrong with this. Yes, I believe that if I selected another system there with the system 2 selected, and you can see there that it's added and moving in conjunction with the fire. A little bit too strong in this case, but you get the idea. And you could do other things like test out some of these single system presets. And you see here that there are two systems at work. Just like anything else.
There's a great preset for this, actually, Nick. Sorry to let me interrupt you for a second. If you go to the multiple system presets, then go down to fireworks under the fireworks setting. There is one called Fireworks Cascade. And that's an interesting one because the benefit of working with these multiple systems is that these particles then can obscure each other correctly in 3D space. And that's a great idea. Instead of having to apply particular to multiple different layers, you can do this all in one instance of the application. But if you show off, I think it's system 3, if you isolate that one, Nick, then that will show you the the smoke trails. So those are actually based off the same emitter, the same box emitter that you got on the first system. And if that then is adjusted, then it affects all the other ones. So a fast way of working and then keeping all your smoke elements, if you got them together, is working in this way with multiple systems.
Yes. So yeah, just working with these multiple systems and combining them together for your end sort of fire element / treatment. So these master systems, I kind of, let me show, we can sort of see how, with these systems together, how they work really nicely together and how you can switch them and how quickly that they respond when you bring them back over into After Effects. I actually have a fire element here too. Just let me actually isolate it. Just wanted to show that, Simon. This is like some 4K slow motion fire that was
Great.
from Motion VFX, but same kind of principle applies with fire when you go to any of the other stock sites such as Action VFX, as well as Rampant Design sell some really cool toolkits when working with fire. Now, some cool things that we can do with this versus, I wouldn't necessarily have this referenced as a sprite, although you could inside of Particular, because this, by default, this footage file, as you know, Simon, is massive. So this might be a great example when you grab footage like this. If your intention were to bring it into Particular, would be to take this footage source and really scale it down in size. So if you look at a lot of the sprites, the image loops that are supplied with Particular, you'll note that they are relatively small. In some cases, I would say some of those image elements are 70 by 70. I'm not sure how large are the actual movie files, Simon, do you know?
Those tend to be under 500 by 500 because the higher the size, the more it needs to load into RAM and the longer it'll take it to render. A nice little trick here is to pre-comp your flame and actually then reduce that sound to something like 3 or 4%. And then Particular will just see that size without having to take in the original size of the native footage or that master clip. So rather than having it as a single layer, it's a nice trick to pre-comp it, and then it'll make the renders much faster.
Excellent. So I wanted to show here, this is actually already, the background itself is actually keyed out, and I got some text here inside this project. I just wanted to show how this kind of looks or interacts together. You'll see that although that the text is behind it and we have this fire element, there is no interaction. And in my mind, depending on the type of smoke or fire or the actual scene, you're going to want to add something to this to add more believability to the scene. By the way, this particular font comes from Adobe Fonts. I'll give a reference to it later, but you can download it from Adobe Fonts, the sort of old school style text. I wanted to mention something first of all inside Universe, if that's something that you have access to. If I go over here to Window Extensions and go to my Red Giant Universe dashboard, you can see here that it loads up, and I'll dock it over here to the side and close down my super comp temporarily. Under this category, specifically under Distort, there is a setup here for heat wave. So it's an effect, and you can see here the thumbnail for that effect. If I single click it in the dashboard, which gets installed when you put on Red Giant Universe, you'll see here some of the previews of how this heat wave effect could add some distortion specifically to the text behind it. So I added just the default preset so you could see it, a way of kind of creating this heat wave distortion. I'll apply another preset, which is just super hot, which really exaggerates this effect too much. But I would say to hop in here is to sort of play around with the heat intensity that's going to be on the source layer that you applied to, as well as the blur, and more than likely, depending on the speed of this actual flame, to bring down the flow speed for more believability. Again, this all depends on the speed of your source footage. Again, this fire in particular was shot in slow motion, so inside of After Effects, it may be beneficial for me to actually bring up the retime settings and speed up how quickly this fire is flowing inside my composition. Another thing that I wanted to mention, which I think is super cool, is the way, and I think, Simon, you have a really good example of this too, how fire can interact with footage or a scene when you bring it inside of VFX SuperComp.
I've got a good example of that, Nick. If we could play a little shuttling over to different screens.
I was setting you up for the shuttling over of that because you have I remember you telling me you have a great example and I wanted you to show that. Here we go. Hop back over to you.
Whilst we're doing this, thanks for the question, Vladimir. Vladimir's asking, can we use future Red Giant products directly in Cinema 4D's window or the render window, or specifically the viewport? So that's something that will be interesting as well to look at. So thanks for these. It's always useful to have extra questions about how these things would be useful to work together. So please feel free to chuck in more of those. What Nick was talking about is the real world effect of things like the background being distorted through the heat of the fire. That's changing changing how we see things. You know, that classic thing when you're looking at jets, or if you're looking above a fire and you just see the heat haze above it. So you can do that in Universe, and Nick was talking about that with the heat wave effect in Universe. I've got a little project together where I've got just a simple barrel image, and I just added a series of different pre-comps into it to be able to then just build this up with different layers. And I built this in pre-comps for a specific reason. This is kind of the next step on that I would normally show people, but you can of course build up each one of these inside a separate system inside After Effects. Here we go, there's the embers and some flame and some smoke. And by the way, I'll make this project file available for download. I'll add the download link to the chat section and the one for the Steam or the coffee cup as well. But I wanted to show you here inside SuperComp, where we've got, this is the SuperComp interface. If you haven't used SuperComp before, you can select various layers inside your comp. And when you send them to SuperComp, then inside the effects panel, it creates a separate layer called SuperComp, and on that layer we have the SuperComp effect, which takes over the compositing. It's like a super advanced pre-comp, if you like, but all the layers talk to each other. And on future sessions, we'll be talking more about SuperComp and how you can do things like color correction in the background, and that changes the light wrap of all the foregrounds, and you access the tools by clicking on the little plus buttons inside the SuperComp layers. But I just wanted to point out here something that you can do inside SuperComp, as well as having different additive layers and then having different types of gamma, so you can work with linear and log footage in different formats, in either individually as a stack inside SuperComp, or actually for the whole thing, you can then change that so that if you're working in linear in After Effects, you can do those workflows too. But I just wanted to show you this option where we can set up a layer as a displacement layer. And then that means that you can use whatever's in that layer to use the displacement effect, which is similar to the one that was talked about in Universe, but the displacement in VFX has got a few more tricks to it. And by the way, if you are looking for presets, the preset section is also clicked on the plus button inside the SuperComp layout. But I just want to show you this. I made a previous barrel heat wave setting. Here we go. This was made inside particular, and just really black and white smoke. And then the trick to making these displacement layers is have a lot of gray values. If you make it too high contrast, then it doesn't look quite as good. But in this case, all we've got is this barrel layer, which, because we've chosen this as a displacement layer, it's adding that effect. Let's turn off some of those other layers for here. So that's just adding to the realism. And here we've got that barrel slowly displacing the background, and not necessarily separating out the color channels, because you don't see that in real life. You see it much more when we're playing with displacement in graphics. But for something that like this, then we can keep the chroma spread pretty low, so that it just is distorting rather than separating the color channels. Great. Okay. Back over to you, Nick, to hold that thought. I'm just racing through, by the way, just because we got lots of these small little examples, and we want to get you thinking about what's possible, as well as some of the real world reasons why we're doing these things. So chucking the screen back to you, Nick.
Awesome. Okay, show screen. And I should be back. Wanted to talk, we've been talking so much about a fire. I wanted to make sure that we had some room for a little bit of conversation about smoke and dust before we run out on this hour. It's amazing how time flies so quickly during these short 1 hour webinars. So I did want to make mention about smoke specifically because I think Particular does a fantastic job at handling smoke simulations based on some of the settings, specifically in turbulence, which we'll cover here in a second. But we can say essentially that smoke is a combination of a solid, liquid, and a gas. It may contain other elements, and it's essentially a collection of unburned particles. I wanted to give the example of a cigarette, primarily because I've worked with cigarette smoke in a feature film called My Father and the Man in Black. Part of it was done stylistically, the other part was done in camera. I thought it would be good to show you some examples of both inside from actual footage from the film. But the general idea is that because the cigarette's smoke is a higher temperature, the lower density causes it to rise. And as the smoke rises, it cools, which creates a draft or a high air velocity. So the velocity changes later on as the smoke begins to continually rise. And also make mention that a lot of times when you see cigarette smoke, it actually is sold stylistically. I'll show an example of that inside my actual project. Now, if we look at smoke as footage, a lot of the similar same principles apply. So I won't go into a lot of detail like we did that before, but you can see it being commonly mixed with fire, the fact that it's slow motion. And another fact that I think is something to keep in mind with this, both smoke and dust, when you're dealing with a footage format, it's going to be flat, right, Simon? So the fact that your footage is flat in a real high-end composite, you're going to want to take multiple layers of smoke, right? Play around with blend modes or compositing tricks and place them in Z space in several different areas. One great thing about Particular is it already spreads out your particles in Z space if you need to, specifically with dust. So if you're in an environment with several graphical layers, you can really sell dust coming from everywhere. With Particular, I think it's really good for smoke, as I mentioned. Same idea of combining multiple particle systems and not being afraid to use the aux system, which is essentially particles giving birth to other particles. We want to mention that physics is your friend in the case of smoke, and to not shy away from fluids, combining it even with the air simulation. Wanted to show now, back into After Effects, the example from the Johnny Cash film. Two examples in particular that I worked on. It's called My Father and the Man in Black. You'll see one here. This is actually something that was created in Particular at that time, which involved, in this case, two solids with different versions of particular, which were combined together and then blended in with the photograph. If I go later on, I have another example here where this smoke was shot in camera. And what's funny about this is the director of photography used a blue filter smoke. So this particular cigarette, Simon, actually created a blue tint to the smoke as a stylistic effect. And he said that he
Interesting.
commonly does this in film. So he didn't use just a regular smoke. He added a blue a tint to it. In this particular case, Johnny Cash is down on his luck and in jail. So that blue color has a psychological effect as well. And I find this, this example great just because even fire elements are treated many times. It's a combination between a stylistic treatment and your real world organic feel and flair. Going to an actual example of smoke, I have one here. This is something that I created inside of particular, and I did it with two separate particular layers. And the only reason for this was to mask out some of the bottom of the actual smoke trail. What I wanted to show here, Simon, in particular, was a few things under the physics section, which might be interesting. So let me actually go to the smoke layer, and under physics, I'm going to head over to air. Everyone sees here how wind has been activated as the source that is causing, in this case, a streaklet or a series of streaklets to rise. The big mention that I wanted to is the fade in time. So I was talking about earlier that as smoke picks up, it cools off, and which causes velocity to affect essentially the position and swirl the smoke. And if we take a look, there is a parameter called fade in time. So really, that is preventing any of this swirling happening or action happening until 3 seconds into the actual trail. This was combined with an aux particle system or a secondary particle system, which I ended up treating separately just to have it show up in different parts of this really simple composite. And you can see here, there's a slight difference. So while one is referencing a streaklet of particles, the other is just referencing a simple sphere. Its emit probability is set to 100%, but it has a very, very short life and a large feather. And this combination has that sort of trail up of the actual smoke element that we have here.
Interesting. That's nice to see the reference to the real world physics of what happens to smoke over time.
Yeah, and then while this we'll take here, if I play this back a little bit, it is kind of moving fast, but another one of my favorite items here is your ability to play with the physics time factor, which is a setting under physics, which will, in several ways, you can play with it and add variance to the multiple particle systems working at once. Now, I think, Simon, you had an example for dust as well, right? And before you show it, I wanted to show some slow motion dust from Motion VFX. This is part of several packages. They have multiple different variations of dust, all shot at that 1200 frames per second. But you can see the varying sizes of these particular dust elements. There's one in particular, and this is 4K slowed down footage, so it will appear slowed down. It's almost like what I found interesting, little bokeh elements combined with little smaller elements of dust here, all combined into one composite, which you can then take and use a specific blend mode and mix in a Z space. But depending on the environment, you're going to get different forms of dust or dust simulations. the advantage here is the fact that you can speed up the actual dust footage. But what's great about these, in my mind, when you kind of look at these footage elements, is the fact that you can actually study them slowly. And by being able to study them slowly, you can bring in more believability to your particle systems. So you did have a dust example, right, Simon?
Well, I do. I just got a dust workflow, so
Okay,
I can quickly
let
show
me
that.
let me hand that back to you.
And it's pretty simple. Let's just go into show my screen. Great. I go into After Effects. Here we are. And I'm just going to open up. I noticed that you do a lot of things inside the panel, Nick, which is quite interesting. I got so used to using the designer for just the real-time playback and configurability. I do know a designer in Tokyo who's got a whole massive screen which he rotates 90 degrees, and so that he can have this one panel on that screen, so you can just like scroll up and down it and do that thing that we do when we've got multiple of these sections open and you just keep scrolling up and down. But I just like going into the designer just because you can see the things happening immediately. But on the dust, really, it's a question of just splitting out your emitter. So if you're using a box emitter, I mean, if you've done this a few times, you'll recognize this, but if we just like increase the emitter size like so, and then also the nature of how dust moves, we don't have to have that motion quite as fast. We can move down the velocity of it so it's a bit slower. Here we go. And also, you don't have to have these popping on and off, just the opacity. We can use a preset to jump in and out, really, whilst they're moving slowly, and also give the particles a longer life. Here we go, to make them like a number of seconds long, 20 seconds or so, so they're just generally drifting. But the main point is a really quite obvious one, is when you're dealing with the emitter size. If you can go into the individual settings, you can go to the X, Y, and Z and just give yourself masses and masses of that Z space, so that when you've got the particles nearer the camera, they are then moving at a different speed. Let's just change this loop duration. Let's give us 1000 frames so we can deal with that a little more. There we go. So then these particles gently moving through, maybe bring down the particles per second. And also the other key thing is under the particle at the size, for example, just ramping up the size random, so that they're just like changing a different size. Let's change the size down slightly, and then to taste. But the one takeaway, by the way, is just that Z space on the box emitter. And with that technique, interestingly enough, let's just show you this. There's a fantastic technique inside Seth Worley's tutorial that he crafted alongside with the making of his short film. So as you probably know, we have been making short films for many years now at Red Giant, and Seth's new film, Darker Colors, is fantastic, but he also goes through in a tutorial how he manages to get these kind of dust particles appearing in inside the flare, or rather the light rays that he's describing by shine. He does a nice use of a track mat. So that's a nice thing to look at, just as a bit of it as a passing reference. There, I'll just put it inside the notes. What I wanted to do is extend upon your example about manipulating smoke in different ways, Nick. So if I just reset, by the way, you can reset inside the designer as well. And if I just go into a really simple one, smoke rising, which is inside the smoke presets. It's a nice technique too. Let's just zoom in here. By the way, the C key circles you through these different modes so that you can then translate or zoom or rotate your smoke, or in fact, the entire preview. But the idea is just to switch on the shadowlets. This is switched on automatically inside this preset, but the word for the day, shadowlets, which is how the different particles then cast shadows on each other. And the idea here is that you can go into the shadowlets section and then play with this background color. So if we then bring this up from black to kind of a gray value, and then add some warmer colors in here, then you can begin to change the nature of the shadows of this smoke without necessarily changing, or without changing that particle type. It's still the loop particle, but we're now beginning to add a different color into this background. So rather than having to mess around with color correction on smoke and have multiple layers, you can affect how these shadows actually control or affect the color of their neighbors. Whether it's something that is more of a wood fire, maybe it's something darker, which then it's more resident or more symptomatic of, say, an oil fire, or even if you wanted to do like undead dragons or sci-fi, just like move this into the blue realm here, and then you're beginning to get more kind of stylistic designs, but still keeping the integrity of that original particle. I think it's quite a useful setup to just remember some of these settings. Like, for example, that's the reason why a lot of these presets have that set up, because then it just reminds you, oh, that's a nice quick way of doing something without having to spend too much time on it, and also giving you like a creative inspiration for new settings. Talking of creative setting, I know we're almost up to time. Forgive us, probably go over by a couple of minutes, but just a couple of things I wanted to show you. A few weeks ago, we had a fantastic webinar by one of our expert trainers, Lionel Vicdomini, and he's coming to do some more of these sessions in the future. Hi, Lionel, if you're listening. But I just wanted to show his setup here. He made this this whole comp inside. Let's just turn off that layer. Here we go. He made this comp inside Cinema 4D and then brought it into After Effects for compositing these sparks along the edge. And the reason why I wanted to share this with you is how some nice little tricks for being able to do post-production on sparks without having to do it necessarily all within particular. Because I know you can change the color and the emitter size and the color over time and so on. But when you're compositing, it's nice to be able to make these last minute changes, if you like. So if we jump into the particles themselves and just look at how it's built up for a second, we've got these, in fact, let's solo this. So we've got the actual sparks themselves. Here we go. And then we've also got an optical glow from VFX Suite. So optical glow is an inverse square roll-off, which is a fantastic way of just adding instant, beautiful glow at 32-bit. Calculates everything at 32 bits, even though you might be in 16 or 8 bits on your project. But the idea is that a small little instance of exposure, here we go, adding the exposure effect just makes the optical glow bounce or pop even more. Quick question from Logan, can we make access to this previous webinar? Yes, I'll add that to the links. Lionel goes through several webinars, in fact, I'll send you a link to all of them, that go through how he built up the model and brought it through into After Effects. But the two little things I wanted to point out is that you can stack these things up on top of each other, plus a turbulent displace effect, just to begin to manipulate these positions of these particles. So there's multiple different ways of doing things. If you can go into the physics section inside particular and use some fluid simulation, as well as go into the air section and doing the air resistance and then changing the turbulence field, for example. Sometimes it's nice to be able to then add this as a stack in the effects and turn it off, especially if you're previewing or you're doing multiple different iterations, if you like. So it's just a nice view into Lionel's creative process about stacking these up. And one quick thing, if I may, let's just quickly show you, where is it here? Another project file, which I'll share with you. This is something I put together a while ago, and it's a really simple setup. But it takes advantage of the fact that inside particular, you can set your emitter type to lights. And this, I did this ages ago when the Doctor Strange film came out. I was just trying to recreate the Doctor Strange portal, just in a really basic, how might you approach that? Anyway, so what I did is I've got a null which is spinning around. These lights are parented off that null, and I'll give you the project file for this so you can have a look at it. And because of that, each of these lights then is causing the particles to be emitted, and also they're lighting each other because we got the shading switched on. But the thing I wanted to show you here just is a reminder. You may have seen this from previous versions of particular, but we have the ability to bounce these elements off different objects in the scene. And they're bouncing off this surface down at the bottom here because, if I just bring the here we go, Roman candle here. Well, we've got our bounce physics model switched on, and we're bouncing it off a floor layer. And it's just one of those other plausibility things that in this case, we've got the sparks sliding because I've selected slide. If you kill, then they instantly switch their visibility off. They can bounce if you've got something which isn't sparks, which is more bouncing off a surface. But I just wanted to bring your memory back to these sorts of effects where you can have these as two layers and then fake this off a different layer, especially if that solid has got an alpha channel or a mask cut into it rather. And that's a nice way of having those sparks bounce down several layers. And Harry Frank does a nice tutorial on that. One quick thing whilst we're here, really quick. I know we're running over, but I just wanted to show you this. If you ever are doing things like this, where I've got this spinning so fast that you are then seeing the difference between two frames. This kind of kinked line in the circle is the difference between two frames because the emitters are spinning too quickly to catch up with each other. So inside particular, this is another setting which has been around for a long time, which is easily forgotten. Here it is, position subframe. And if we set that to anything which isn't linear, so 10 times linear, what happens is that these immediately smooth out. And so that they're calculating the curve in between frames. And so especially if you're moving things really fast as an emitter, this is a nice little technique to be able to do that. And I've got a small little tutorial that I'll include with that when you get the catch-up email. Fantastic. So, and yes, a question from Judy, is there a tutorial for this bouncing project? I will find one in the next few moments and post it for you. Anything else you wanted to quickly add, Nick, or just mention from your nice keynote that you were preparing earlier? I'll make you back a presenter.
Oh, not from the keynote, but that it would be available. And I think just to mention that there's some coverage on dust here as well that you guys can take a look at, and the difference of the dust elements of some of the things that Simon was showing. But I also wanted just to mention your very short and succinct tips, Simon, on YouTube. In a few weeks, we'll actually have an example of the dust portal effects coming out. So versus it being the sparks that you just showed in terms of the light emitter there, we'll have one set up for a dust portal effect that you guys can take a look at as well in how to do that. And the best part is it's only 20 seconds long. So I don't know if you have that page up, Simon.
I do.
But, hold on. It is Simon Walker CSI on YouTube that you guys can access. There we go.
We'll send you the link. In fact, let's put the link up here. Here we go.
And hold on, let me change presenter right now. There we go. But yeah, if you do a search for Simon Walker, a CSI on YouTube, you're going to see some of those 20-second tips on all different types of treatments and workflows. Also one that we recently just went out specifically on the lens textures inside of No Light Factory, which is just a great way of believability with lights, and many more. Not to mention the realistic glows there from Lionel that you were just showing too, Simon, on the second row.
Absolutely, there we go. I've stolen his idea because I loved it so much. These are completely available. And by the way, if you do go here, let's show you this steam cup. Here we go. This has got 20 seconds just as a reminder about the techniques that I went through. But if I just pause this a second, the nice thing about them is that we include the project file as often as we can. So we'll give you the link to all this. But if you just go to the same channel, then you can have a look and then download the project files. One thing that I brought your attention to, an extension of that Steam project, is the fact that you can fly. That same settings, you can then set up fly-throughs for clouds, and it's exactly the same project file setup. I'll include the download link to this, but we're using the physics simulator inside Particular to actually give you those nice organic changes in motion and there's vortexes and whirls and eddies of movement in the clouds without making keyframes because it's all being done by the simulator. Fantastic. Great. Okay. So, Wes, thank you for letting us overrun. One last thing, or two last things I want to say. One is that I don't know if you know, but we have certification for the Red Giant tools. We'll include this link too. If you want to get certified, you can take these assessments. They're each an hour long, and you can do them on the main 4 suites: Trapcode, Magic Bullet, Universe, and VFX. Here's the link in here. And you can add a shiny certificate to your LinkedIn profile if you so desire. But it's an interesting way of finding out more about what's inside the software. And if you get any questions wrong, then it links you back to the original, or back to resources where you can see how those techniques are made and get a deeper understanding of the tools, if you like. And the last thing I wanted to say is thank you so much, Nick, for your help. I just want to show Nick's training page here, creative111.com. And I continue to learn from you, Nick, for all sorts of reasons. But whenever you show something, I find a new tip that I find useful. So please feel free to go over to the Nick's training site. I'll add a link into the notes as well.
Yes, and thanks so much for having me, Simon. It's always insightful to talk about these wonderful things inside of Trapcode particular and VFX Suite, and also just picking up techniques from you as you go through your own workflows of like developing Steam, and how you did that with Liquid was really kind of cool to see, and all the examples that are out there.
It's interesting. There's so much to know with these different tools, and then it's always easy to forget one small little setting that can help make it more realistic. So that's really been the aim of these sessions. This is why we call them demystifying, but it's just really exploring into some topics, jumping in around different subject matter as we did today, and we hope to just continue these every Monday for as long as we can. So just in that same particular format. So feel free to join us for next week's. I know that some people were having some trouble with the PDF download link. So what I was also going to say, if you go to redgiant.com, there's permanent links inside their blog section. So if we go to redgiant.com, just go to blog, and here we go. This first member on the blog, Demystifying Post-Production, and it's got a link there to all the registration ones. So if now you go and click on this link, you'll get a link to the recording. But if you click on any of the other ones, then you can register for next week. We're looking at some more of those workflows. A number of questions that we had during the session about how Cinema 4D and Trapcode are going to be working together. We'll give you a little more information about workflows that you can do now with that, interestingly enough. And if you've got any suggestions for future sessions like this, we had an excellent suggestion earlier on about the best practice workflow for EXR files out of Cinema and using Redshift. Yes. And so we'll be doing some Redshift sessions along the way. And we're definitely doing those. Thank you for the nice comments, by the way. Thank you, David. Thanks, Greg. And Robert answered your question. We'll definitely give you the links. And we'll keep this blog isn't going anywhere. These blogs will stay relevant, and you should see on social media if you follow Red Giant on Twitter, and also if you follow Clips and Handles on Twitter. That's Nick's address. That will it's like my mantra. We'll put this all in the link.
That's me.
At the end. But thank you so much, Nick. Clips and Handles so is your Twitter handle.
It was great, and thanks so much for everyone for attending on today. That was great that so many of you guys stuck around. It's awesome.
Brilliant. Thank you again. Okay, stay safe. And thanks, Dustin. Thanks, Sean, Robert, Olivier, Mads, Kent, Andreas. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye,
and
everyone.
We'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. All right, take it easy. All right. Cheers. Bye.